today, our program is called The Flood of '93, and it's being presented by Miss Joan Stemler. Joan is the Chief of the Water Control Office for the St. Louis District, Mississippi Valley Division of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Joan has worked in water management since the Great Flood of '93. She is the subject matter expert in many areas of water management, including reservoir operations, river forecasting, all for the Mississippi Valley Division, which includes the Mississippi River from the headwaters of Minnesota to New Orleans, Louisiana. Joan has also recently been named the National Hydrology, Hydraulics, and Coastal Professional of the Year. Congratulations. It has been more than 30 years since the Mississippi River reached its highest point in history on the St. Louis gauge. And you know, we all are just as young as we were 30 years ago. Haven't aged a bit. Joan will be discussing the Great Flood of '93, what led up to the historic flooding, the crest in St. Louis, the widespread impacts, the response, and what was learned. So please help me in welcoming Ms. Joan Stemler.
All right, thank you, and I'd like to introduce my boss, Leonard Hopkins. Him and I were both in the office during the flood of '93. I'm that old, so anyway, it was a pretty crazy time. So when I was asked, actually I think Leonard was asked, and he's the boss, so he passed it to me, to present on this. It's very near and dear to my heart because I was born and raised on a farm in Columbia, Illinois. So that big levee breach that caused that 60-foot hole, that was my neighbor's. And then my parents had their house surveyed, and they knew it would take out the first level of the home, so all the pictures and all the keepsakes went to the top floor. And it just filled with the backwater. So the house was still standing after the flood receded. So it was a very trying time. My parents lived with us. So for the Corps of Engineers, I know sometimes you hear the bad, but there's a lot more good, you know, that the Corps is out there doing and helping with. But we go to 24 hours a day, 12-hour shifts in water management. And we're watching the levee overtoppings, and we do the forecasting in our office and such. So it's, you know, you work 12-hour days, and then your parents are home. And my mom was always an early bird. At 4 o'clock, she's up banging dishes around, like, Mom, I gotta get up. And, you know, so it was a very interesting time for us, to say the least. Is this, there it goes. Okay, so I just want to throw a few background information slides up, and then we'll talk about '93, and then the changes since '93. So along the way, if you have any comments or questions, you know, usually I like, when I present, I like just to have a conversation with folks. So if you have any questions, just please raise your hand and let me know. So this is a national map of the Corps of Engineers. The color signifies 9 different divisions we have throughout the country, and it includes like the Alaska and such. So we have 600 dams, 12,000 miles of inland navigation, and we have 926 harbors. And then we also provide, our reservoirs provide a significant amount of water supply for the country. So narrowing in, this is the Mississippi Valley, what they had mentioned. We started the headwaters of Minnesota, and then we go down to New Orleans. So the St. Louis district is right there in the middle in the red. So we have 70 pump plants, we have 5 lakes, we have locks and dams, we have 162 recreational areas. So St. Louis, you know, we have 750 miles of levee. So there's a lot going on in that little area of the St. Louis district. So this is a zoomed in view. We operate the projects in water management in my office. We have 3 on the Illinois side and 2 on the Missouri side, and then our locks and dams. So the decision making, the model runs, and all that are done in the water management office. So we always show this as a critical link. St. Louis, if you see the Illinois River, the Mississippi River, and the Missouri River, are all very large, big players in flood events. And it all bottlenecks around St. Louis. So we also transition up above St. Louis. We all have locks and dams. And down below St. Louis, it goes to open river conditions. So during drought, like we've been in the last couple of years, it's very challenging south of St. Louis because of the lock and dam versus no lock and dam. So one other thing I wanted to show before I get into the flood is the lock and dam systems we have, starting from the headwaters down to St. Louis. There's 29 locks and dams, and this is, thank you, this is to keep navigation open. Navigation and flood control are the Corps' top missions. So anyway, the last one ends in St. Louis, and then these are locks and dams. We also have one on the Kaskaskia River, that's down south, and it enters down by Chester, Illinois. So this is a flood in '93 at our lock and dam, and the reason why I'm showing you this is the lock and dams, they are low flow structures. They're to keep navigation moving on the river during low flow times. And the gates are pulled out of the water because a lot of times we'll get calls in the office and saying that we're flooding them with the locks and dams. As you can see, they're flooded just like everything else. So our locks and dam system that we have has nothing to do, causes none of the flooding. So I just wanted to show you, that's well-priced lock and dam during '93 that was in the date. So flood control components, we have levees, reservoirs, flood walls, and floodways. We have 3 of those, levee, reservoirs, flood walls in the St. Louis district, and they all have to work together. Levees aren't going to save a flood alone. Reservoirs aren't, flood walls. It's a combination of everything. So, the Great Flood in '93. Before I get into it, one thing we hear a lot in the office is, how can you have a 100-year flood, 73, how can you have a 100-year flood 20 years later? And, to clarify what that is you have a 1% chance of having that flood every year. So if you're looking at a 1% chance of a 100-year flood, 0.2% is 500, and 10% is a 10%. So the way we always say is, if you have a deck of cards, you pull a card out, and that card will be the conditions for that year. Next year, you put the card back in. You pick the card again. And whichever one you pick, that's the conditions for that year. You have that same chance every year. So whenever, and the urban levees are at a higher protection because they're normally protecting structures and houses, businesses and such. But then the agricultural levees, the ag levees, they're at a lower level because behind them are just fields. So it doesn't justify building them higher to protect that. So that's the difference when you hear, oh, it's a 100-year flood. And just so you know, '93 was a 300-year event. So that just goes to show how much, with climate change and the way the rain events are nowadays, it's only common sense to think that, sometime it'll happen again. I'm just hoping it's after I retire. So these are the top 10 events in St. Louis. Now, these records go back to the 1800s. And before '93, in 1973, I was 11. And I remember driving on the levee with my dad. Well, they would patrol the levee on each side in the Columbia Bottoms because, they would always be scared someone might blow up one part of the levee to alleviate the pressure, to help them out on the other end. And I didn't know that. I drove around with this gun, and he was always like, oh, Joni, that's just for groundhogs. But then come to find out as I got older, it was more than just for groundhogs. So But anyway, in '73, I remember that was like the big flood. And growing up in the bottoms, the river was it was miles away from the house. So we really didn't think we lived by the river until we have an event like this, because we were all protected by levees. So in '73, we hit 43.3, and that was a huge ordeal. Well, then in '93, we hit, it's 6 foot higher. So it was an incredible event. And then since then, 2019 was a quick flood event as well. So anyway, and if you look at this, we had a flood event in the top 10. We had 15, 16, 17, we skipped 18, and then we had 19. So those years were really very active as far as flooding went. So that picture I had showed you before, that schematic that had the Illinois and the Missouri and the Upper Miss, this is where it came into play. This is what got us to 1993. So the average, and the reason why we use Lock and Dam 22 tailwater is it's our handoff from the district up above. And we all work in flow, our models, everything is in flow. So these are flow. So the average for August is 90,000 flow coming down from the Upper Miss. We hit 432,000 in '93. And in Herman, we hit 614,000, average of 71,000. And the Illinois, 90,000, an incredible amount of water for that river. The average is 14,000. So we had 1 million CFS, which is how we, the volume of water coming by the St. Louis riverfront. So what is so unusual about that is a lot of times we'll have a flood event on the upper end of our district or different parts of the district, but this one all fell in line. All of the Illinois, the Upper Miss and the Missouri, everything got hit. So it was just kind of like the perfect storm, if you will. So what you're looking at here is the purple are the daily lows. This is St. Louis, the records go back, I mentioned from like 1861, and the blues are the highs. So this was '73. This is when we thought, and you can see we broke records in the spring. And it's not unusual. And one thing you need to take away is people, whenever spring comes around and they do their spring flood outlooks, everyone is always focused on snowpack. Snowpack is a big factor, it's just not the only factor. So here, this is a more snow-driven event. So, you have a lot of snow. There's been times we've had record snow, as last year, we were in a drought. We had a record snowpack up in Minnesota and we didn't feel anything down here because we had no rains on top of it. So it's just one component of it. So, in '73, we had this, and then '93 came. So, and if you see, that was in August. In September, we broke daily highs for a couple months. This is very unusual. It's a very long, drawn-out flood as far as being so high. So the snow melt had well been through the system when this happened, and it just kept raining on all the key places. And then this is 2019. This took second, but it was a quick up and down, and it was more of a springtime snow rain event driven. So some flood facts. As our reservoirs, we have 5. Rock Island, the district above us, has 3, and then St. Paul, they have like 15. So we all worked together as the Mississippi Valley, and we all held the water back because we knew we were having this massive flood. So by the time you get there, it takes an incredible amount of water to raise the stage a foot, but we knocked off 3 feet of the stage of St. Louis. So we hit 49.6. We would have been, I don't even want to talk about the flood wall because we would have been challenging that, over top the flood wall in St. Louis. So anyway, the reservoirs, like I had mentioned before, the levees aren't going to protect the flood alone. The reservoirs aren't going to do it. It's everything combined that we have for our flood control. We call it a flood control system, and it truly is. So our flood wall was started in '59, and it was finished in '74. But as we know, the '73 flood came along. Wasn't quite finished, but it did save like $160 million. Since then, you know, it's saved like 10 times what it costs. And they said it was like $680 million that flood wall saved from protecting the city of St. Louis and that surrounding area had it been overtopped or not there. So our levees have 229, 39 of our federal levees. We have federal and then we have private levees in our district. 39 of them were either overtopped or breached. And these levees are designed anywhere from 25 up to a 500-year flood. These are more your urban levees that, you know, do protection of businesses and buildings and such. But 80% of the non-levees were overtopped or breached, but they're more of the ag levees, and that's what you would expect during an event like '93. So our public affairs office, when something like this is going on, they always like to try to put fun facts together, even though there's nothing fun about a flood. So what they did is, what was coming past the arch grounds, it would equate to the whole state of Illinois, uniform 3.1 feet. The whole state would have been covered. So this kind of puts it in perspective on how much water actually was coming down on that river. And then 2.5 feet over the whole state of Missouri. So anyway, it just goes to show it was a credible amount of water. This is another flood fact. And 20 to 25 inches, almost half of Iowa had that and below. But if you look, there's still 15 to 20 inches. The whole Midwest was just, it was a crazy amount of rain. So anywhere from 10 to 25 inches of rain. And they have it showing it in 2 months, but in reality, it was less than 2 months because it started in June, and we were counting the days that it was raining in Iowa. And like I said, I don't remember a lot of things from that, but I do remember it raining 40 out of 41 days in Iowa. Every time we were watching the weather, it was like, it can't be, and it was, and it can't be, and it was. So it was just, it was crazy. So changes since '93. One thing, our levee safety program has definitely changed. After you go through an event like this, you know, you learn a lot. So our program now, it used to just be, the levees would be rated on the height. So they have a program that takes into consideration the levees. We work with the levee districts. If there's a problem, you know, we can help maybe fix it, so they don't get kicked out of our program. So, you know, that way they can get help when they need it. And then also, I had mentioned the modeling. Our modeling system, just like anything else, has evolved in time. And the Corps nationwide just pushed out a new water management system update. So we have to show Congress twice a year that we can run a forecast and produce inundation maps. So that way it can help stakeholders, you know, with what potentially could be coming, evacuations, our flood fight teams. We do our own river forecasting in the St. Louis district, and we do that for our flood fight teams. So anyway, back in '93, it was almost non-existent, you know, flood inundation maps, and if they were, no one really had much faith in them. So we run through events through them now. So then that way we can check to make sure, and we have to produce these within 24 hours. So whenever headquarters comes knocking, you answer the door, because if not, they come after you. Right, Leonard? So anyway, This slide is mostly just about communications. We have emergency operation flood preparedness workshops, and we go throughout our districts. I think Cape is the most southern place we go, but the levee districts attend, and we talk to them. My office will present on the last year and the high water event, if there was one. This year I talked about the drought that we've had the last couple of years. But we discuss it, and the biggest thing is, after a flood, what do? I mean, so many times it's like people are left. It's like, you need to know who to reach out to and what you can get from the Corps as far as sandbags or sand or, whatever help you need to know that ahead of an event, not, during an event because you can't get a hold of anybody. And, so these workshops are very, very valuable. And then, as everybody knows, the smartphones and computers, everyone's got them now. And we actually have our data that it comes in some places 15 minutes, some places 30 minutes. But you can get on our website and see the latest updated forecasts and data and whatever the case may be. So it's so much different. Back in '93, we had to bring in extra phones, extra people, and it was only by telephone. So it was like calls it was pretty much 24/7. But nowadays, the phone calls, we still like to get phone calls because we like to talk. Because sometimes when you're just looking on the internet, you don't get the whole gist of everything. So we always encourage everybody to call in and don't listen to the McDonald's coffee talk. Because sometimes people call in and they're already mad. It's like, what is going on? And they're like, well, so-and-so said. I'm like, well, just call us and talk to us, and then, we can help explain it. And then after '08, we had a flood on the upper end of our district. The general got involved because the public were calling. They were very unhappy with the forecasting because some people walked away from homes and they lost about 20 homes that they didn't have to because the forecast was too high. So anyway, we started a fusion team, and it's between the Corps, the National Weather Service, and then the USGS. So our three agencies need to work together. I actually run that team now. A sub-team from the fusion, and we call it the fight team for the agencies, but it's a joke, but it's supposed to be forecasting, evaluation, improvement team. So there's a lot of things that have improved since '93. We're never going to stop the floods. We know that. I mean, you know that. But how we address it and how we go through it, get through it together, that has changed. And it's all for the better. So I have a couple of pictures here. This is a boil on the back side, and this brown here, this pointer's not working, but this brown, that's very, very bad. That was material moving through the levee. So he's retired. He just retired recently. That was the chief of our geotechnical branch. We call them the dirt people. They work with the dirt. So anyway, they came and they'll ring those boils when they find them. And that's what our flood fight teams do. They'll go out, they'll look for any kind of boils, and they start seeing water moving underneath the levee. So they'll keep building this up until it stabilizes, and that they see that the material stops moving so they don't lose the levee. So there's a lot of stuff like this that goes on. I mean, our flood fight teams are out there, they're troopers. I'm lucky I get to be in the office, so. And then this is our arch grounds. You can see the steps of the arch. This is where I was talking about like 1 million cubic feet per second were passing the arch. The road was gone. So it was just crazy. I was able to get down there to see that too. And then the flood wall, the St. Louis flood wall. And they have steps on the back side, so I was able to go take a look because I was young and I wanted to see like what was going on. It was crazy how close that water is. Because I reached over, I was like, oh, it scares you. But it has such force. I mean, that water is just So if that flood wall wouldn't be there, I mean, that's the whole city of St. Louis. So it was pretty scary. And if you think about the 3 foot of water that the reservoirs knocked off, I mean, that was, it was critical. And then, I don't know how many people have seen the Lewis and Clark statue, but it's where his expedition started and he was waving his hat. So someone came back and they had that picture, and it was always like pretty, and there's a duck or whatever it is by it. So anyway, he's holding the dog, and that's Lewis and Clark. So this, I wanted to show this. They showed this a lot in '93, like on CNN, and that this is actually my parents' neighbor's house that I talked about that had gotten swept away, and where they got the backfill effect. But Darlene and Earl Gubesheimer, they're like the best people. I mean, we've known them. I rode the same school bus with their kids, and I mean, your neighbors are miles away when you grow up on the farm, and you know, you have your rocked roads that nothing was paved, and you ride your bicycles on, and you'd have more bruises and bleeding all the time from falling. So okay, so this is wrong on the thing. This is actually '93, not '94.
The water. That house is starting to go.
Oh, Jeff, it's unbelievable. There it goes. Just now lifted off the foundation, and it's just crumbling in the rapid and the violent waters here that are coming through this levee break about 3 miles south of the Jefferson Barracks Bridge.
This is what's left of the Gumersheimer family farm today. 1,700 acres of prosperous farmland, now a virtual war zone.
That's about what it looked like. I've heard more people say they just couldn't believe what had happened out there and what the devastation looked like.
Well, it's just a freak of nature that we tried to do the best we could, and we lost the fight, is all I can say.
When I caught up with Virgil, the Gumersheimer family was again fighting nature. Spring flooding now threatened the family's pig farm.
It was a big old 7-room frame farmhouse is what it was.
As Virgil recalled that devastating morning and the decades of memories washed away, we visited where the family porch once stood.
The house was built in 1907, and my grandfather raised his family here, and then I was raised here, and then I'd raised my family here. And the house had never been wet before. It just brings back memories.
Had the levee broke anywhere but here that day, Virgil's home would still be standing. The sheer force of the current dug out the home's cement foundation, leaving this gaping hole, 60 feet deep, 10 acres long.
And it had taken most of the concrete from the foundations of the grain bins and the barn and the house and had washed them out in the field. We've got most of the concrete cleaned up. It was scattered about 2 miles to the northeast, is where most of the house went. One thing we found a sewing machine on one of the floors.
Darlene Gumersheimer also found much of her cooking ware and 4 of her treasured bowling trophies. Darlene and Virgil now live in a government trailer as they decide where they will try to rebuild their lives.
Oh, we lost, quite a few things that we had put upstairs. I thought was going to be safe, but, didn't know that this was going to happen. Well, it's pretty difficult to handle, but we'll make it.
It was just spectacular that the water could move things and tear them up like it did.
So anyway, I just wanted to show that clip because that kind of puts
Most of Iowa could
kind of
use it.
a downer, but that's what reality was back in '93. And I know my husband and my dad went out whenever it was safe to go out. And we had a hog farm not very far, and I know the seepwater took the roads out ahead of time. So they tried to get some of them out. They could only get the younger ones out in boats and stuff. So there was a lot going on, like behind the scenes, and that people trying to save what they can, especially like the animals. So it was a tough time. Today, if this were to happen, I would think we would have more lead time and we know those roads go out. And I know my dad went into, my mom was at the house and she was needing this, needing that, so they had the military police out and stuff, so no one could get to it to blow it and that. Because I know Dad had to walk across a long field and they tried to stop him. He said, either shoot me or get out of the way, because I'm going to get my wife's stuff, or else you go home and listen to her. So, so the guy just kind of laughed. They were like, go ahead and get your stuff, because they knew that he was walking to the house. So anyway, it was a rough time for all, but Darlene and Earl, you know, they knew that, you know, at least they were safe. No one died, no one, you know, drowned or anything. So that was the most important part. But anyway.
Did they rebuild?
I don't think right there they did, because there's still like a big gaping hole. I was able to go out with the survey team and when they surveyed the hole to see how deep it was and that. So, but since then, I mean, they've passed and there's not a lot of the farmers left that were there in the '93 flood. So yeah, but they were really, really good people. Yeah.
They wound up rebuilding Valmeyer, didn't they?
Yeah, Valmeyer.
They moved it.
Yeah,
Moved up the hill.
They have a new Valmeyer up
Yeah,
the hill.
right.
Yeah, and FEMA came in. They have a super nice high school, and I mean they did everything up right. Now there are still some people in the old Valmeyer that didn't want to move, so they're still there. But yeah, they did move the town. They relocated them. So if we get that high, we're in trouble.
Yeah.
So anyway, are there any questions or? Yes.
Go on.
In this area, would it be, you know, we're kind of in a hilly area, is it more safer in this area? Or there are some little creeks that come by around.
Yeah.
Do you want to repeat the question?
If it was like safer down here.
Yeah.
Usually when you're protected by a levee and you lose a levee upstream, like we lost Columbia Bottoms, it really helps the downstream folks. Because on our forecasting, you can see, you know, we forecasted really high stages, and as soon as that levee breaks, you can just see everything starts falling because there's so much storage area that's filled up by that water. Instead of going higher, it goes wider. So any levee break, whenever you're down here to the south, any levee breaks to the north helps you. Not that you want, you know, you don't wish bad on anybody, but it does help, you know, the people to the south. So, yeah.
How tall is the flood wall in the city of St. Louis? Like at what river level would cause
The 50 foot is in
52.
flood wall in the city of St. Louis to be
52.
52?
Yeah. So we would have tested that out. Hey, we got to 49 and a half. We knocked off 3 feet, so we would have been right there. So yeah, it was really, it was crazy. Yeah.
Who controls the barges? So when it's flooded water like that in Bushton's now where it's so low,
The Coast Guard.
the Coast Guard does?
Yeah, and water management, we have, it's called River Industry Action Team. It's called REAC. And during low water, we probably are in contact more than the high water, trying to keep navigation open. But anytime there's a closure in the river, it's the Coast Guard. The Corps works with them and we might recommend something, but the Coast Guard is the one that actually closes the river. And they help. We have folks out buoying the river, and so do they, the Coast Guard. So they're in our building, so they come down often. During high water, we have a couple briefings per day, especially when something like a '93 event is to occur. So, so it's a joint effort with the Coast Guard and the Corps. They work very well together. They're a good group of people.
You showed the water up, you know, where the arch is up to. Well, in 1904, all the way up until the arch was built, my grandfather owned a 4-block by 4-block building where the north part of the arch is. And I was wondering, I've never ever heard from any of the family whether or not, because that goes back to 1904, if there was flooding or not, if he ever had to contend with flooding in his buildings or not.
Yeah, our records go back to 1861 or 64, or whatever
Yeah,
they
because
started.
they took it over by eminent domain to
Okay.
build the arch.
Yeah.
And so he was, right in that
Yeah.
building was right in that area.
But
And they
it-
didn't have the levees, I don't think, then. Did they
Yeah, I
have
don't
the
know.
levees?
I don't think the levees were in there.
Yeah.
really.
No, not until, all the warehouse district that was down by the riverfront.
Right.
They were susceptible to the rising and falling river, but, the main buildings and stuff, like where the old city hall is, was back up higher, at a higher elevation. But yeah, the warehouses, probably where your relatives' property was taken for the arch grounds, if that was along the riverfront in that old warehouse district, that would have been impacted by those early, floods before the flood wall was completed.
I just never ever thought about it, or never heard that any of that was flooded.
And this is such a great magnitude of water and event that, you would hope these type floods don't come along, back in the day, they might have not been recorded, or, you know what I mean? People just dealt with it and it moved on.
I don't ever recall.
Yeah. And now, like, the more development and stuff that goes in, it makes a difference too, because there's a lot more dollars behind levees and flood walls, so, yeah.
In '73, my home was on the Big River,
Oh, yeah.
and the Big River goes into the Merrimack, and that goes into the Mississippi. We were flooded in, not our home, but the streets for the outlets were flooded.
Yeah. Those rivers are pretty fast reacting rivers.
They didn't
Those
go
are,
down, it took 5 days because my husband worked in the city and he had to sleep on the table.
yeah. There's such a backwater effect too, that, it doesn't let that water recede. So, yeah, those are tough. That's a tough area.
What was the cause of the major flooding that occurred along, the Merrimack? Yeah, remember when everything was shut down, 55 was shut down?
That was just a few years ago.
Oh, not too long ago,
December.
yeah.
It wasn't too long ago.
Yeah.
We had to have water brought in.
December.
Yeah. That December flood, I remember that December flood.
It's just back,
Yeah.
the backwater, the Mississippi River got so high that it backed that far up.
Yeah.
I couldn't remember when it was. I remember living through it.
Yeah, well, and the problem is, like, whenever you were feeling that backwater effect, you had a bunch of rain on top of it too. So that just magnified everything, that it made it worse, yeah. Go ahead, yeah.
Since '93 flood, Chesterfield Valley has, filled enormously. How protected are the buildings?
Don't comment.
All of us that lived around there were shocked to see that they were building.
Yes.
It's like, how, it was a flood zone, how did they build?
Yeah, they're levee protected. Correct, yeah. Yeah. Next. Yes.
I've seen in our area that some people are building near the river. I know it's a floodplain, how can they build in a floodplain?
Repeat that, because I know not everyone can
Okay,
hear.
she's asking about the floodplain. How can people build in the floodplain? We have a floodplain management office, because we get calls like that often. So we'll transfer them down there, and they go out, and that's their expertise. And it's kind of like New Orleans. Why do people build back in New Orleans whenever they're going to flood? So we hear that a lot too. But that's, you can answer, because that's not,
The Corps of Engineers works with FEMA, help produce flood maps. And so if somebody builds in a floodplain, of course, they're going to have higher insurance rates because they're building there. But if somebody owns the property, they can't necessarily say you can't build something there, but then they're going to have high insurance rates. So if they do get flooded, they've paid into that pot, to get reimbursed from the insurance companies.
and I know at the reservoirs, sometimes they're building, and the basement has to be at X level. You know, it can't be below that. So there is criteria, like Leonard said, with FEMA and that, but, you know, we don't deal with that in there. We just pass them on to the other offices that do deal with it, so, yeah.
Who decides who can build, which cities can build a levee? Like, for instance, along the Merrimack River. I know years ago, the city of Valley Park flooded, and it had a really bad flood. And after that, they built a levee to protect the whole city of Valley Park. And ever since the introduction of that levee, Fenton and 44 go flood every time the Merrimack River floods now, and you can't use the highway.
Yeah, the levees are actually, the Corps doesn't build a levee unless Congress tells us to build the levee. And we work with them with the analysis and stuff, like what's behind there and the level of protection and stuff like that. But evidently they reach out to their congressmen and folks, and a levee was funded. Because the Corps can't just go in. And actually, we get calls in sometimes because there are folks that'll start pushing levees up, and they're not allowed to do that. So if they get caught, then they'll make them take it back down.
Because I had heard they were going to do that in Valley Park after the last flood. But even, and that would even make it worse in the Fenton side.
Yeah. Yeah. Your best deal is to call your congressman, because they can deal with that and note it, because that comes from them.
Well, you just would think they wouldn't want the major interstate to go underwater.
Right. Yes. Yes.
What was the punishment given to the guy that broke the levee? You know?
He asked what the punishment was for the guy that broke the levee in West Alton. That I'm not sure of. I did hear rumors, and it was just a rumor, that he was going to be punished. There was jail time associated with it, and I don't know how much.
Okay.
But they were trying to make an example of it, because like I said, you know, I know the farmers patrol that, so that doesn't happen, and somehow that did.
There was a lot of damage.
Yes.
Did that.
Yeah. Yeah, I heard that there was jail time given to him.
Is there a chance ever again that Festus and Crystal will be cut off from each other again?
I would say there's probably always, I mean, we have that type of event again. You know, I would think, you know, there is a chance of something like that occurring.
And
but
like during the 93 flood, you know, if you've got a concrete flood wall, you know, you got potential for, you know, piping going underneath the flood wall, but like an earthen levee, which most of the levees out there are earthen, if you get a quick flood where it comes up, the levee gets a little wet, but then the river goes back down, that levee is very stable. During the 93 flood, which the river had been up since the previous fall, those levees get very saturated and weak and can have, you know, even though they're built to protect to a certain height, the longer duration that they're, you know, saturated, you know, can have a more likelihood of having greater issues.
Time for one more, if there is any.
Yeah.
I'd let her choose
I
them.
was just interested in, do you have an estimate of drownings, deaths caused by the floodings?
From the 93 flood? I haven't heard of any death from the 93 flood, which, yeah, and I had seen, and they show it in a dam safety, where there was a dam break, and I mean, they lost hundreds of lives, you know, downstream. So hopefully, like nowadays, with the new technologies and different things and communications that have improved, hopefully that doesn't occur, because we have enough lead time that, you know, and the one problem is whenever they ask people to evacuate, they don't always evacuate. They choose to stay in, and we have a guy, and he calls in every day, sometimes 3 times a day, and he lives right along the river in Grafton, and he stayed at his house, and he was living on an air mattress until he hit the ceiling, And he's a true river rat, though. I mean, he was, and he got bit by snakes. And but he chased down looters. Like he was, because a lot of looting goes on and stuff. People come on their boats, and you know, it's a mess when that goes on. But there are some people that are just not going to leave, you know. So.
Well, join me. Thank you.